Beautiful. So thank you so much for being here, Ellie. I really appreciate it. And the reason why I reached out to you is because you have such an incredible presence. And I think that what you do for the Chamber is fantastic. And so I'm really curious about how you came to be. And I'd love, I know that you studied business and that you've worked in a lot of not-for-profits and working for WOW specifically as well, which was really intriguing. Would you like to share a little bit about your journey of how you came to be the leader that you are today?
Wow, that's go back quite a few years. I don't know if you've got that much time, but thank you as well. It's really nice to actually sometimes just get away from your day job and just sit down and actually think about other things and have conversations. So thank you for the opportunity. I actually genuinely really do appreciate it. To go right back to the beginning, I grew up in Guernsey in the Channel Islands, which is 25 square miles just off the coast of France, and spent my whole life wanting to live in London, because that's what you do when you live in a small island and you're just, desperate to leave. So I went to university in London and I studied business studies, as you said, and worked in London University, but also at LSE, which at the London School of Economics, which at the time was sort of a hotbed of kind of activism and great stuff. So while we were studying economics, it really was from quite a different point of view. Then sort of fast forward a bit, I ended up working for a television news agency in London for WTN, Worldwide Television News, which is now APTN, working in the newsroom and producing documentaries and entertainment news, all sorts of different things, wide variety of things. And probably was on reasonably sort of a trajectory, sort of career path that kind of looked a little bit like this. And then I met someone from New Zealand who said, don't do that, let's go traveling. So, which seemed like a really good idea. So I said that quite glibly, but actually it was a really good thing to take stock and think, actually, that's not the only way to live. And sitting on the tube at the age of 40, not really saying anything to your neighbours wasn't the most sort of inspiring thing.
Yeah.
So we travelled for 6 months on a motorbike, had a great time, trucked around Europe, and then ended up moving actually to the Cayman Islands, which sounds very glamorous, but I had family there, so we moved there and carried on doing TV production. And then decided at some point when we were starting to have a family that we should be somewhere. So we came to Nelson for a year. That was our plan for 1 year, 27 years ago. And at that point, I realised that where I was living, it wasn't really possible to do the jobs I'd been doing before. And that's quite a bit of a moment to go, hang on a minute, then what am I capable of? Because actually you can't just suddenly slot into a role that's made for you and just assume you can just look at the situation's vacant and get a job. So it was at that point that I started to realise actually what's become probably more understood now, but transferable skills. Back then you did a job and that's what you did, kind of in the world that I was inhabiting. Now I think we understand so much more that you gain skills and then you can transfer them to all sorts of different areas. And I was really fortunate that through family connections and through friends, there was an opportunity to work for Nelson Bay's Arts Advocacy and Marketing Network, which was a little not-for-profit, supporting basically mainly craft practitioners in the Nelson region. And never having worked for a not-for-profit before, always working in a commercial world, I really didn't sort of understand the nuance. So we ran it just like an agency, essentially. We became a marketing and PR agency for the arts community in Nelson, which was good fun, and it was pretty random at times, but actually we learned a lot. And there were 2 permanent employees, and everyone else sort of came and went as projects required it. Again, that sort of gig economy wasn't necessarily the understood business model at the time, but it was the only way that we could survive. So we crew up, deliver a project, and then move on to the next thing, which was very much that agency kind of work. That was great fun. And we were incredibly, probably a little bit arrogant about what we were doing, and we thought we were doing amazing ththings, but we constantly communicated that. So every week, come hell or high water, we'd send out a media release to, media was so much simpler then, there was basically a database of media around the country. We sent out a media release every week, either about an individual in the arts sector or about the collective. So consequently, we started to build this really big profile of the arts community, which was great. And we were able to build on that. So that was a lot of fun. And then I moved back into TV for a little bit when my kids got a bit older. And then I ended up being, again, another arrogant move. Now I'm saying this out loud. I sound like someone who's got, full of ideas. I think are the only good ideas. But I stood for council, because I sort of got to a point of thinking, actually, I don't think that the people making the decisions that impact on my life necessarily taking me into account in a general sense, and also just having worked with the arts community and understanding what that brings to the community in the wider sense, but also how it was viewed, which was not necessarily as part of that wider economic stimulus for the region. I kind of got slightly frustrated with that. So stood for council and was a councillor for 3 years and then deputy mayor for 3 years, which was a learning curve like no other. Suddenly having to really understand public policy, what that means, decisions you make that impact directly on people's lives immediately, either most simply financially, but in so many other ways. So that was a really, while at times frustrating, I value that learning so much because it makes you realise just how those systems work and how sometimes they don't work, which is also, really important. And then I had an opportunity, just with all the work I'd done, I guess, and different connections, to work for World of Wearable Art. And that was sort of my main gig really for 8 years. I ran international projects and managed business development and international projects. So anything that wasn't the show in Wellington was kind of my world. So we had a touring exhibition and different activations, and it was great. Really met incredible people. WOW is an energy like no other. It attracts the most talented creative people from all over the world to come together to enter this competition and be a part of it. And that was really wonderful to do that. But 8 years later, working across 5 time zones simultaneously, you kind of get a bit worn out. So at that point, I just wanted to come back home, basically, and work back in Nelson. And this opportunity came up at the Chamber, and I thought, yeah, I could probably do that. And I guess I'd worked alongside the Chamber when I was at council and a few other things, so I understood what it did, and the energy of those small businesses, those people that put skin in the game every single day, that worked really hard, not with a focus of money, but to do something really amazing, is very inspiring, and I love it. So that's what I'm really enjoying about the Chamber at the moment.
Wow, Ellie, what a succession of beautiful growth spurts.
Yeah.
Within those roles and being in it.
So it's very long as well.
No, not at all. I think it's really important to recognise, how much pressure you have to withstand, how many decisions you have to make, the variety in the roles that you were working in, how much that adds depth and complexity to who you are today.
Yeah.
And it's a really important part of your story that helps you make decisions and show up in the way you are for your team.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and it is. I talk to some people now, and I feel old enough to be in charge. That's kind of, I've got to that point now where I think actually, I understand things, get so many things wrong all the time. Decisions you make, think, oh, what on earth was I thinking? But actually, you get to a point of being old enough to understand that actually the impact of that isn't nearly as big as you think it's going to be, and how then you deal with it, I think. So that's the joy of the superpower of getting older.
Yeah, and what I'm understanding from that as well is that relationship with the uncertainty, the decisions that you have to make consistently, and in your role, that irreverence around if something doesn't go your way or a decision is made and you think, what was I thinking? It actually doesn't need to consume you. And I think that's a very important quality as a leader, to not dwell on, but focus on what you can do.
Oh, absolutely. I think, not the hardest thing, but the thing I find difficult is when you have, with not necessarily at the Chamber, but younger employees or people who are just starting, and they get so wound up and so caught up in something that's actually, at the end of the day, the impact is minimal. But it's good to be conscientious, and that's really important. And we all go through that, and we all dwell on those things where actually we're the only one that has really impacted on it, because it's our ego or something that's actually makes us think, oh, we're cross with ourselves. The impact on everybody else is usually quite minimal, and there's always a way through. And that's what I think is, you get to that point of thinking, if that's the worst thing that happens today, then that's probably an okay day, and how you then use that. And it's always an improvement opportunity. That's the only way to work it. Otherwise, we'd all just be, sort of sobbing on the floor.
Curling up in a heap.
Couldn't get up in the morning. But no, I think, but it does take time to get to that point. You don't think anyone's really born. If you're born like that, you'd probably, it'd be quite weird. But
yeah, absolutely. It's such an important turning point in someone's development, isn't it? To take themselves lightly, to be able to have that introspective view of themselves that doesn't need to define them.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing. Self-awareness is something that's difficult to teach, but when you see people who have it, it's actually really obvious. And not to be, again, empathetic to the point of paralysis, because then you don't do anything, but to really understand your impact on other people and why you do things or say things in the way that you do, and what impact that does have as well. Because I think we spend a whole lot of time at work, and if we're not enjoying what we do, I think I know a lot of people don't have a lot of choice. And so I think if we do have choice, we have to be really respectful of the fact that we're in that place. And I've always had a thing with my children, when they were growing up, it's like, what do you want to do with your day? How do you actually want to spend your time from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to sleep? You have got choices, and that's that's such a fortunate place to be. So I think it's really important that we make those choices wisely.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really impacted me at Aspire last year, and you said that one of your highest values was whānau first, and just really living true to that value so that you can have that contentment in your soul, that you're being with your family, you are living your best life, and then as a result of that, come to work with a lot more enthusiasm and grace, because you're not worried about the family, and you're creating that the situation exactly how you'd like it.
Absolutely. And I think if, again, we come together in family units. I'm reading this really good book at the moment called Humankind, and it comes from the premise that human beings are essentially kind, and that's why we've survived, because we look after each other in a general sense. I mean, there's always some outliers, but essentially that's why we have succeeded as a race of people. And I think that just is so much part of how we have to think about it. And I think if, as the family unit, if we can keep that safe and strong and happy without being consuming and suffocating, I've got one son in Melbourne and the other one's about to go off to Europe, and that's brilliant. It's not about having control, but it's about just making sure that, you spend time. And, I think, again, I feel very, very fortunate that I can balance my life in that way and make those decisions to do that. But equally, I want everyone around me to do that as well, and not ever feel that they can't go off and be with family if they need to be. It's essential.
Well said. And I love how you brought up control there. And I'm sure as a leader, that's such a key element. Can you share with me what's your mindset on control?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably like the ultimate opposite of a micromanager, I have to say, mainly because actually, and again, this is, it sounds a bit odd. Well, no, maybe not odd to say, but I have got people working for me who I know can do the best in the job that they're doing. That's not my job to do. That's their job to do. And they're there because they're really good at what they do. And if there's ever a time when they feel that's not working for them, we'll have a conversation about it. But essentially, I don't need to be across everything that's happening, because I'm not an Excel spreadsheet sort of person, but equally I've got people in the organization who are very organized. And likewise, the things that I do are not things that they would ever want to spend their day doing. My perfect day is arriving. Who knows what's going to happen? Anything can happen, and you just deal with it. I don't need to know from minute to minute what my calendar looks like. I've obviously got things locked in, but the more that's a dynamic environment is when I really enjoy it. That's what I love. For some people, that's quite the opposite. And I totally understand that. So I have to make sure that I don't become so loose that they don't know what I'm doing, that it puts stress on them. So I have to control myself, but no, I don't need to control them. They're really good at what they do.
Beautiful. And I'm sure that trust that you have within them to do their jobs it empowers them to be able to take responsibility in those roles, and they will naturally strive to do well rather than the fear-based approach.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And we're all grown-ups.
Yeah.
We've all got to this point because we've got experience that we bring. And I don't know everybody's experience intimately, but I do know the skills and the aptitude that they bring here. And for me, it is really about that attitude, aptitude, ability to learn new things, and actually a curiosity to learn new things, because we all want to develop and continue to grow no matter how old we are or what we're doing. And I think that's such an important part, because then we can hopefully reflect that out of this organisation, so people understand that we're here. We're not just in this fixed box of this is the Chamber of Commerce and this is how we operate. We have to be dynamic.
Yeah, and I love how you've used one D word, but I'd love to dive into the other D word that keeps on coming up in conversations with you, the disruptive leadership era. And what does disruptive actually mean to you?
Well, I think disruptive is anything that literally disturbs your day, disturbs your trajectory. The disruption comes because something happens that you're not expecting. And then you have to deal with it. But that's not to say, I mean, disruption is just the sort of the collective noun. It could be anything that comes through in that day. So it could be minor disruption in terms of, at the moment, a lot of people are struggling to find staff. That's really disruptive for businesses, that they haven't got the right people. Or to those macro disruptors, if we're talking about, obviously, climate change is a huge one, but also just the way that different business models are operating, the disruption of AI that comes in. There's so much. But it's how you look at that situation, instead of thinking, this is a negative thing. How do you use that change and that interjection, or that I guess that opportunity to review, to then do something positive with it, rather than just being fearful of the fact that where you think you're going and how you think you're doing it is no longer the case. And again, I know that for a lot of people that's harder, and you need to insulate as much as possible. But actually, if you can see it as an opportunity and take advantage of it, that's where you get the real sweet spot, and that's where you get the growth and the innovation and all of those things happening. And it's wonderful. I mean, I use ChatGPT regularly these days. It's like I've got my little mini assistant who collects my thoughts for me and writes a first draft on just about anything I'm doing, which I didn't have. I don't need to employ somebody. Well, they couldn't get that out of my brain as easily as they could anyway. But I think those sorts of things, it's like, instead of being nervous that things are happening, it's how do you use them in a positive way.
Yeah,
that's a very minor way.
And I love that it's constantly challenging the narrative of what exists to get to that next level of deductive thinking of like what could be. And it's almost forcing businesses nowadays, because of how fast the markets are moving, because of trends continuing to develop, to prime themselves to be a disruptive thinker before it becomes too much for them.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing we know, the one thing, if we sit at this moment in time on this day, we look back 10 years, we're not living the same life that we lived 10 years ago. So we know that 10 years from now, we're not going to be living the same life that we're living today. That's an absolute given in my mind, that things will always be changing. And it may be so small and iterative that you don't notice it and suddenly you realize you've moved in such a different direction. But other times it will be a significant impact that then you have to deal with instantly. And as people, we're kind of primed more with the significant impact because we deal with it in a way that's sort of much more, it's physiological, that fight or flight. We either take advantage of it or we don't, and how we manage that. But I think if we look at the iterative change, it's just as impactful. And I think that's really important to try and be aware of that and see where we're actually going. And even to the language we use, the way we speak to each other, everything has changed in such a short space of time and will continue to change.
Yeah, beautiful. And would you like to share with me an example of some of the big challenges that is there a noticeable one that sticks out in your mind as a leader? Talk us through that challenge.
I think COVID was a massive challenge. I mean, it was, you can't ignore the fact that suddenly, for a huge proportion of your economy, they just don't have an industry anymore. Tourism, overnight, borders are shut. We saw the physical impact in those ways, but I think what we're seeing now is actually the ongoing psychological impact of that. And I don't think we can underestimate that in terms of how people's thinking has changed around things, and they're staying closer to home, and they've changed the way that they deal with places, including workplace. So now we have a lot, and ourselves included, I have a flexible workforce. That's great. And on the face of it, it's wonderful. People can work from home, they can work from here, but the struggle or the challenge for me is how you retain the culture of your organization when suddenly you've got a distributed workforce. So and so for us, it's about being, I've just talked about not being controlling. The one thing I do require or ask is there's one day when we're all in the office together. And in order to make that useful, it's not about people just sitting at their computers and working away that they could do at home. We have to make sure that there's another interaction that makes it useful for them to be here. So we have a team meeting. We try and do, if we do some kind of social event, we'll do it on that day as well. We don't do that every week, but we'll ensure that it connects so that people can see the value in coming into the workplace on that day, because I don't want to be that sort of dictatorial person who says you must come to work 4 days a week. That doesn't work for some people, and they're far more productive at home and happier but knowing that actually we need to ensure the culture of this organisation remains positive and connected, so people don't feel suddenly that they've been cast adrift and don't have a sense of what's going on. So that's the challenge, and that's on a small scale for me. So for the larger organisations, it's a much bigger challenge, and I think that we just have to keep working at it, because there's going to be no overnight fix with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you've said about having that team meeting all together on that once a week, so that you can maintain the same level of growth within the team, so that the level of engagement is happening. And quite often those meetings, when you can bring up experiences that have happened, they can understand that other people are going through the same challenges, and have more of a conversational meeting rather than a it is creating culture, because you're creating an opportunity for people to connect.
Absolutely, and those meetings are always a mixture of a bit of show and tell in terms of stuff we're doing, but always more around what's happening for people in the wider context of their world, if they want to share things. But it's really nice to be able to have that opportunity, so we get to know each other really well. And we've done a bit of work as well in terms of, as teams, working on our mindset, and we understand each other's personalities a lot more than we did 2 years ago, which is entertaining and also can be a little bit challenging. And again, I'm sort of somebody who I know myself pretty well, and I know that if I'm operating and I get slightly under pressure, instead of kind of like hunkering down, I just go bigger. I just go, oh yeah, let's do something even bigger than that, because clearly we just need to add more. And that's my natural response. And I know that, and I'm very aware of it. So I have to kind of temper that, because I've got other people in my team who, if they come under any kind of pressure, they'll do an even bigger spreadsheet with even more decimal points, so that they know even more detail. And I'm just like, no, let's just do something big. So, and it's understanding that, and that two extreme examples, but it's just appreciating that we all approach things differently, and those team meetings are really important to keep that conversation going.
Love that. And how do you approach one-to-one check-ins with your team member? Share with us what's your system around that?
It's fairly random. I mean, it's formulaic, and I try and make sure I connect with people at least every couple of months. In a sense that we'll have a sit down and just check in and make sure things are going okay. But also, I hope and I work to have a very open relationship with everybody. So if anything is happening at any given time, it's just like, have you got half an hour to sit down and have a conversation, so that I can understand what's happening for people. Because again, I also appreciate, as we talked about earlier, that while I think most things are insurmountable, I do appreciate that for some people, they do get stressed about things, and they just need to be able to share that in a way, then we can work through it. So I'm hoping, and I think it's the case, that if things are not going brilliantly for whatever reason, and we all know, you start doing something and it doesn't work out how you hope it will, we can sit down and talk about that and work out a solution before it becomes something that's so stressful for that individual that they don't even want to go to work in the morning. Because that's the last thing I would want to have. I want everybody feeling that they're coming to work to do something that's productive, and that they're getting some enjoyment out of, as well as some real return in other ways, and actually they're comfortable with what they're doing.
Yeah, really well said. One of the things that I'm curious about as well is, because some companies now going into this economic downturn, they are cutting their learning and development budget, because it's one of the easy things to cut. And I'm sure you understand the impacts on that long term. Would you be able to share what it is that you think is a good mindset or approach to learning and development within businesses?
I think for me, it's about viewing your team as such an essential resource. So in the same way that you would maintain your equipment and you would maintain your production, whatever it is you're doing to make sure that you're most efficient with that production, you need to maintain your people, because actually they're your biggest resource. They are the people that keep the business running and growing it and getting it to where it needs to be. So if you don't actually give them that new input to make sure that they're always able to achieve their best, then actually ultimately it will impact on the productivity of your organisation and the culture of the organisation, which also has a negative impact. So I think it's about looking at everything. You may not need to spend the same amount of money, but it's ensuring that you don't pull back so much that actually you lose sight of the fact that the important thing in your business are the people who work for you. And I think businesses that do that well will thrive, and anyone who runs a business where they maintain that level of input into teams will see the benefit, and they'll absolutely talk about that. I think, unfortunately, for very small businesses, and we have so many of those in the region, they often don't have, the owners are the ones who probably need the most input at that point, because they're the ones who are doing all of the work of being on the business. They're in the business probably a bit of too much of the time, and at night they're doing the GST return. So they're the people who basically also need to have that input. But it's easy to say and difficult to do. So it's something that we're constantly trying to find the right solution as well, so people can come in at the right price point, for want of a better way of saying it, so that there are options around to basically engage with your staff that won't require significant budgets.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do that through the IRNDA and providing that funding, which is wonderful as well.
Yeah, so all of the RBP, that's support for people. And also for us, it's about providing, hopefully, inspirational sessions where people can come along, and while they might not learn anything specific about their role, they'll be inspired and enthused in a wider context. So we run a series with Westpac Smart, for example, where we have had a series of presenters, and the next one is actually all around AI. So people can go and they can spend an hour and they can just have input in this thing that they may or may not know anything about, but it just gives them that sense of actually being connected to the wider network, but also getting some upskilling at the same time.
Yeah, beautiful. And I know that that's a big shift, especially for New Zealand, who are really skills-based economy, to upskill the person, and as a result of that, they'll get better at doing the skill rather than just giving them more skills training, but you haven't helped them elevate their level of thinking. Absolutely,
and that's so important. And there's a whole new funding paradigm that I've been reading a bit about recently, mainly in the not-for-profit sector, but it does work within small businesses. It's pay what it takes. And the idea is you employ people and you support them with what it takes for them to do the job that you want them to do, rather than investing in something, the equipment, and as you say, more of the practical things. You actually empower the person. And so you give them what it takes to do the job that you want them to do.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ellie. This has been such an insightful conversation, and I really value the way that you've shown up for the Nelson community to support those small businesses that really do need your level of thinking in this economy and in this time. And it just goes to show that your consistent efforts have created the leader that you are, and it's really wonderful that you can share your wisdom.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks.